You're listening to The Murder in My Family, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including Missing Persons, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Zodiac Speaking, Scene of the Crime, 3 Men and a Mystery, and All Things Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford. In this episode, we'll be discussing the double murder of a beloved husband and wife, Lester and Carol Dotz, in their Tennessee home, at the hands of 3 dangerous young men. Instead of their loved ones celebrating the couple's approaching 45th anniversary with them, they were left to mourn their deaths. We'll dive into this case after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this show, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to introduce a friend to the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can continue to grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam, or by searching for the Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Murder in My Family. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/The Murder in My Family. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. And thank you to all the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. One last note. Please consider supporting any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that the show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you. And now on with the show. In 1995, 67-year-old Carol Dotz and her 69-year-old husband Lester Dotz, who went by Les, were enjoying a peaceful life together in the town of Farragut, Tennessee, located in Knox County. As their 45th wedding anniversary was approaching, they were looking forward to their golden years together. But sadly, 3 troubled young men with criminal backgrounds would prevent the Dotz from growing old together. All too often, we discuss someone searching for justice for their murdered family members. But sometimes, even when you get justice, you have to continue fighting to keep it, even over a quarter of a century after that justice was obtained. This is a story about fighting to hold on to justice. Carol Dotz was born as Carol Jean Baker on Christmas Eve in 1927. She was a loving soul who volunteered and helped rescue animals. She graduated from Wittenberg University, where she was Kappa Delta. Les was born on October 30th, 1925 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He owned a business and served his country proudly in the Second World War. He was part of the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity in college. After meeting at Wittenberg University in Ohio, Les and Carol Dotz married on June 17, 1950, 1 year after their first date. The couple had 1 child, a daughter, Jeannie. In 1961, they moved to East Tennessee. The Dotz home provided a safe and loving environment for both people and pets. Growing up, Jeannie's friends would always flock to the home, often spending time with and hanging out with Les and Carol, sometimes asking them for honest advice, or just hanging out and watching TV. Les and Carol also provided a loving home to their pets, some of which were rescues. One of their most beloved pets was a collie named Honey Bear, who kept the Dotts busy and happy in their later years. On February 3rd, 1995, 3 young men, 13-year-old Harley Watts, 20-year-old Thomas Gagne Jr., and 18-year-old David Scarborough, took a drive through Farragut. Thomas, the oldest, was driving, and they decided to go to an upper-class neighborhood looking for a house that they could rob. They ended up at a dead-end street in the Village Green neighborhood where Carol and Les Dotts lived. Carol and Les had gone out to dinner that night, so their home was empty, and no one answered the door when the group rang the doorbell as a test to see if anyone was home. The house seemed like a great target as David and Thomas got out of the car, leaving Harley as their young lookout. About 30 minutes later, Thomas and David came running back to the car quickly. They jumped in and the trio sped away. David was holding a gun and he gave it to Thomas, who yelled out that he had just shot some people that had walked in on him during the robbery. As they drove off, Thomas threw something out the window, and they fled into the night. Sadly, the people he had shot were Carol and Les, who had returned home from dinner, and the young lookout had failed to notice and warn the others that were burglarizing their home. On what was supposed to be a quiet, uneventful night after a nice dinner together, before turning in for the night, Les Dotts had been shot 5 times, and Carol Dotts had been shot 7 times, both with a 9mm handgun. Les's wallet, which was in his pants pocket, was taken. Carol had been shot directly in the head, and news reports estimate that the gun was just 7 inches from her head at the time. Her purse was also taken. It was a brutal and cold-blooded attack on the beloved couple. Instead of celebrating their 45th anniversary together, Carol and Les died by each other's side, probably shocked and afraid at what was happening to them. The next morning, their son-in-law Robert, who worked with Les and Carol at their business, went to their home office only to find their blinds still closed. Robert thought that Les and Carol had just been out late the night before and were sleeping in, so he got what he needed from the office. Their dog, Honey Bear, came up to Robert and greeted him. Nothing seemed out of order, and Robert left. But later, he realized he needed something else from the office, so he went back to the Dotts' home. This time, he found their bodies and realized that their home had been broken into and ransacked. He called the police and then went home to break the devastating news to his wife, Jeannie, that her parents were dead. Police arrived and began to investigate. The missing wallet and purse were soon found dumped not far from the home. It wasn't long before police ended up speaking with Harley Watts, who was arrested for stealing a car. In a panic, he began spilling the beans about what he had done with his cohorts to Carol and Les, and he quickly pointed the finger in the murders at Thomas Gagne Jr. and David Scarborough. He admitted that the 3 of them had been looking for cars to break into that night, when Thomas decided to rob a home instead. David told the police that he waited behind the home as sort of a secondary lookout while Harley waited in the car, and that it was Thomas that broke into the house. Then the shooting started. The trio of young hoodlums was arrested for the murder of Lester and Carol Dotts, and the community was outraged at what these 3 young men had done. But many of them weren't shocked, because this trio had criminal histories, or had families that did. At trial, the jury found David Scarborough guilty of 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of theft, and 1 count of aggravated burglary. The felony murder convictions were later reversed on appeal, because the jury had not been instructed properly, which we'll get into. Thomas Gagne Jr. pleaded guilty to 2 counts of felony murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary, and 2 counts of theft, and he was handed 2 life sentences. Due to the technical issue in Scarborough's trial, he faced a new trial, but in 2006, in order to avoid that retrial, he took a plea deal and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. This plea deal specified that he would not be eligible for parole until at least 2026. During trial proceedings, it came to light that just 2 days before Les and Carol were murdered, a man named Tim Fitzpatrick was shot in his home during a robbery attempt with the same gun that killed Les and Carol, but he survived. It was further proof that these 3 criminals were very dangerous young men. Harley Watts, who was 13 at the time of the murders, was released in 2001, and he's gone on to commit further crimes including aggravated burglary, financial exploitation, and theft. Thomas Gagne Jr. is not eligible for parole. However, David Scarborough is up for parole, and earlier than expected. His parole hearing is on December 9th, 2021, just days from when this episode is being released. Carol and Les's daughter, Jeannie, has created a petition to ensure that David Scarborough remains behind bars. She wants to make sure that he can never take someone's loved one from them, the way he took her parents from her. She wants to keep him behind bars, but time is of the essence. Again, this episode is being published on December 4th, 2021, just days before Scarborough is up for parole. Jeannie's trying to collect 2,500 signatures, hoping that support will help keep him behind bars where he belongs. And there's still enough time to sign Jeannie's petition, and she hopes she will help her by visiting change.org and then searching for her petition, Justice for Carol and Les Dotts. Please, if you can take a moment to help Jeannie, it would be greatly appreciated. And if you can, share this podcast episode and her petition on your social media so that others can sign the petition as well. But again, time is of the essence. Jeannie sat down with me to talk about the tragic and senseless act of violence that stole her beloved parents from her. That discussion is coming up in just a moment. Hey everyone, it's hard to believe, but summer's over. Now we're officially in fall. But just because the season's changed doesn't mean that things that have been weighing on us suddenly disappear. If there's something that's interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals, I'm happy to tell you there's help. And that help is BetterHelp. BetterHelp online counseling just might be the right solution for you. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can connect in a safe and private online environment. It's so convenient. And you can start communicating with a counselor in under 24 hours. This isn't self-help, it's professional counseling. Send a message to your counselor at any time. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, all without having to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room. BetterHelp can assist you with so many things, from anxiety, depression, and grief, to sleep issues, LGBT matters, and family conflicts, and so much more. Anything you share is confidential, and while BetterHelp isn't a crisis line, it is convenient, professional, and affordable. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp that they're recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. I want you to start living a healthier life today. As a listener of the Murder in My Family, you'll get 10% off your first month of BetterHelp by visiting BetterHelp.com/family. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Once again, go to BetterHelp, that's HELP.com/family, and you'll save 10% on your first month of BetterHelp. Hi, Jeannie, and thanks for coming on to discuss your parents' case with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the support and the help.
Well, it's my pleasure. I know you faced and survived something awful and tragic, something none of us should ever have to face, the double murder of our parents in their own home. And I guess to start off, how old were you when this happened to your mom and dad, and how did you personally react to something that horrible and tragic when it first happened, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I was an adult. I was 38. I was very, very close to my parents. My husband, my mom and dad had a small business together, and the four of us were very close. We were family and we were friends. So to have something like this happen out of the blue for no good reason just boggles the mind, is for lack of a better term. The day that my husband found their bodies, I was home working all day on the computer for stuff I needed to do for work. And when he got home, I could tell something was wrong because there was a sheriff's officer there and our next door neighbor was there. And Linda had this look on her face, and my first reaction was, oh my gosh, something's happened to Paul and the kids. And then I realized, wait a minute, she's looking at me like that. And my husband sat down on the edge of the couch and took my hands, and he said, you know, your mom and dad are dead. And I said, no. And he nodded. He said, yes, they are. And I'm, no. And I said, what happened? Was it an accident? Was it a drunk driver? And he was shaking. Tears were coming down his face. And he looked over at the sheriff's officer, kind of a silent plea for help. And the sheriff's officer said, no, it was not an accident. It was intentional. They were murdered. And I remember standing there and saying no, no, no. And I started walking around our family room in a circle. And it's not so much that I remember doing that as I remember the feeling of me doing that. And it's like I was kind of also standing back watching myself doing that. I was in complete 100% denial. And I just was absolutely frozen inside and out. I don't think I've ever felt so cold in my life. When you get that kind of news, that kind of horrible news, everybody reacts differently. I got cold.
It sounds like you were sort of in shock, maybe?
Yes, definitely. Because Bri looked at the officer, because he sees me doing this loop around the room, and he's getting a little panicky, and the officer said, she's in shock. So I stopped all of a sudden, turned around, and went, where's Honey Bear? Is Honey Bear okay? And Honey Bear was my parents' collie. She was a rescue. She was taken away from her original owners by our wonderful veterinary clinic. And she was so sick and so neglected and so abused that even with the medical treatment the vet were treating her with, they weren't sure she was going to make it. But my parents took one look at her and said, we're going to adopt her, and we're going to make sure she gets, continues her medical treatment, and we're going to do everything we can to make her healthy and happy. And if for some reason the medical treatment doesn't take, we're just going to give her all the love that she could ever handle for the time she has left. And she turned out, not only did she survive, she thrived. You would never have known the look at her later to think that there had ever been wrong with that beautiful collie girl that when we first saw her, she could hardly stand up. She was so weak. So all of a sudden, I was literally hell-bent on getting over to my parents' house. I wanted Honey Bear. I needed Honey Bear. And the officer said, no, I'll go get her for you. And I'm like, no, I want to go get her. Of course, there's no way I was not in any kind of sort of rational place, so there was no way I should have been behind the wheel of a car. And the officers finally calmed me down a little bit and said, she's in the back of a police cruiser. The heat's on. She's nice and warm and cozy, and she's getting fussed on us. He said, I'll go get her for you. So I said, okay. And of course, later on, a little while later, he did bring her back. But unfortunately for us, there was an unethical news reporter who, even though the sheriff had clearly stated to them, the family has not been notified. Of course, the only person that knew was my husband because he was the one that found them. And he said, do not mention their names and do not take shots of the house, but, just plain no. And this woman goes on live, because it's right after 6 o'clock, so this is 6 o'clock news time, going, well, can you at least confirm that Les and Carol Dotts were murdered in their Village Green home?
That's terrible.
So,
just trying to get a news headline, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah, just she wanted to scoop. And so all of Knox County who was watching that particular station at 6, between 6 and 6:15 on Saturday, February the 4th, 1995, knew my parents had been murdered before I did.
That's awful.
So I think it was about 20 after 6, 6:15, 20 after 6, when Bri got the sheriff's officer and brought him back from the house. And I hadn't had the TV on when I was working on the computer, which was kind of unusual because usually for some background noise, I would have it on. So because of that, he hadn't been home 10 minutes. I had absolutely no time to absorb this information. And the phone starts ringing, so Linda starts screening calls for us. People start knocking at the door. Yeah, and these were friends and neighbors, and they were there because they cared. They had no clue that I had just literally found out. And at that point, they had no clue that Bri was the one that found them. So that entire evening, we've got people coming, and Bri and I kind of go into host and hostess mode, almost like little zombies, making sure people have something to eat, something to drink, and so on and so forth. And I say a little while later, the officer brought Honey Bear home. She and our collie, Mischief Marie, were the best of buds. And they always got along together, and they were wonderful together. So anyway, I got to the foyer of our house as the officer was bringing her in, and I just dropped to my knees and I wrapped my arms around her and I started sobbing.
Yeah. You knew how important she was to your parents, and you were just thankful that she was okay, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, and I loved her dearly too. I mean, we all did. And I was so grateful she was alive. And so that was kind of the beginning of our journey into what I refer to as the criminal lack of justice system for victims of violent crime and their loved ones.
That's a good way to put it. And before we get into the details of what exactly happened to your parents and who was responsible for their murders, can you tell us a little bit about your mom and dad and maybe share some of your memories of them with listeners?
Sure. Well, one of my favorite memories of my father involves Honey Bear. Like I said, she was so malnourished, so weak, had been abused and neglected when they brought her home. And she'd been with them a few weeks, and she was already doing so much better. Well, I stopped by on the way home from work one day to pick up a book my mom had read she was going to lend to me. And we never went in each other's front doors. We had our garage door openers on the same signal, so we would just go in through the garage. So I went through the garage, through the laundry room, into the kitchen, and I could hear from the family room, I could hear my father going, grr, grr. I'm like, oh, what on earth is he doing now? And I go in there, and there is my dad on his hands and knees with the end of a rope toy in his mouth, putting the other end in Honey Bear's mouth, teaching her how to play. She didn't know how to play.
So it sounds like he knew how to have fun and just relax and not be too uptight.
Oh, yeah, there was definitely nothing uptight about my parents. But I say that will always be one of my favorite memories, is to see a grown man, it is just, I can't have that memory hit me with a humongous grin coming on my face, because I just stood there for a couple of minutes just watching. He had no clue I was there, which made it even better.
Yeah.
So, just such big hearts. They had such amazingly big hearts. And I grew up with collies in a sheltie. My parents loved animals. And my mom had a couple of collies when she was growing up. And in fact, their first collie, Duke, was a housewarming present from my Uncle Don, my mom's brother, and his wife when they bought their first house. And he was 3 years old when I was born, and immediately decided I was his. So I kind of inherited the love of animals, and especially towards collies and shelties. But see, my mom is one of those people. She could be very, very prim and proper on one hand, and the other hand could let her hair down at a heartbeat. She did not fluster easily. I mean, just did not. And we had this little itty-beeny, tiny cabin on Anglers Cove on Wattsboro Lake on the side of Round Mountain here in East Tennessee. And we had this little flat-bottom boat with a half horsepower trolling motor. And our Sheltie and our Collie used to like to ride around in that with us. So my dad and I were out tooling around and just, enjoying the day. My mom was up in front of the cabin in a little area in a lawn chair reading a book. Now, our property's next door neighbor, and by next door neighbor, like 2 acres away, because I think we had like 4 acres, ran a cattle farm, Black Angus. So my mom was sitting there reading, and she fell asleep. Well, we had headed back in, and we were in the process of tying, getting the boat up on the ground, and then there was like this little hill that my dad had built steps on. So we were getting ready to go up the hill, and all of a sudden we can hear my mom talking to somebody. And we're like, okay, the dogs are with us. She's not talking to them. And we come up, and she's sitting there. These little Black Angus calves apparently had gotten through the fence, had come over and nudged her on the shoulder while she was dozing. And instead of jumping up and screaming like a lot of people would, she goes, well, hello, how are you? Are you lost? And starts scratching its face, petting its nose. And I'm just like, my parents are nuts.
So it just sounds like they're real big-time animal lovers then.
Oh, yeah. And, they just couldn't found two people with more open hearts than them. When I was growing up, my friends always loved my parents. And the neighborhood I grew up in, there were kids. I think the smallest average family. I was an only child, but was like 4 to 6 kids. We had lots of families with 8 and 10 kids, a couple with 13, one with 15. So there was always kids and activities for the kids and people in the neighborhood and everything. We'd all get together. So I grew up literally in a community, in a very sharing community. When we moved from West Hills to Village Green, right before my junior year in high school, my parents already knew people who lived in the neighborhood. They had some friends. Our house became the place that my friends from high school hung out. And, their parents knew they were going to be safe there because it was the rule. My parents weren't home. Other than a couple of close girlfriends, nobody else was coming in. And it didn't take long that, all of a sudden I'd be looking around in the family room. We'd have music on. We might be watching TV. We might be playing bumper pool, card games, or working. And I know several people would be missing. Well, my mom and dad turned one of the extra bedrooms into like a little TV room. They'd be in there with them.
Hanging out with your parents.
Yeah. And, and even like sometimes somebody would stop by, and I actually had more guy friends than girlfriends when I was in high school. Somebody would show up at the door, and Mom would go, oh, Jeannie's not here, she's out. Oh, that's okay, we'll just hang with you. And Mom and Dad said, we would have really liked to have had a Friday or Saturday night to ourselves sometimes, but they weren't going to turn them away.
Yeah, seems like they were really welcoming, friendly people.
They were, and a lot of times my friends would tell my parents, especially my mom, things that they couldn't feel comfortable talking about to their parents, and they didn't even tell me. And my mom and dad were always completely honest with them. Whether, they're going to tell you, you ask me a question, I'm going to answer you honestly, and you might not like the answer. And I realized one day years ago that I'm the same way. Don't ask me a question if you don't want to hear how I really feel about it.
Sure.
If you don't want me to speak the truth. And, they were there for them.
Yeah. And you mentioned this community. It was the Village Green section of Farragut. Is it Farragut?
Right. It's it was it's a very large subdivision now. They were just beginning to build houses on the street behind my parents when they moved in. They were the third street in.
Okay. And how long had your parents lived there for when they were killed?
Well, they moved in July of 1972. Got a real good deal on the house because the builder got caught fooling around with his secretary, and he had to sell fast before his wife got hold of everything. So it's amazing how that works out that way. So, and they had been talking to him about building a house, and he goes, "Listen, I got a deal for," because he planned on moving into it. And so it's, it was a custom build. It was built by somebody who was going to live there himself, so you knew it was done right.
Yeah.
And Village Green was just very, it was like a giant family in some respects. Once in July of every year, they used to have this big cookout barbecue thing up by the swimming pool. It wasn't a very big pool, but, it was nice. And we enjoyed it. And what they do is a lot of the men would get together the night before because you had to baste it and turn it or whatever they had to. And they would stay up all night playing cards and taking care of that. And then the next day, basically the entire day, everybody was there hanging out, swimming in the pool or playing cards or, playing badminton. And that would go on until way late into the night. We used to all get together because we got a lot more snow then than we do now. And, of course, we were never exactly what you would call the pinnacle of snow skiing area. You'd have to get up into the Smoky Mountains to do that. But we had a couple of really good hills that was great for sledding. And you'd see, there'd be parents up there, build a bonfire, there'd be hot chocolate, and we would be sledding, and my friends of those of us who lived there would come over from other neighborhoods, and then all of a sudden call their parents and say, "We can't get home." My best friend did that several times.
So you could hang out there a little bit more together.
Yep.
It sounds like a nice, close-knit community.
Well, as I say, it really was. When I was growing up, and and it was still a close community in many respects when my parents were murdered. But the subdivision had gotten so large, it had lost a lot of that connectivity.
Yeah, when it's more of a small town feel, then you start expanding, and then
right,
it gets bigger and bigger, and hard to keep that community feeling. What was crime like there? Was it relatively low crime? Was there any history of any kind of violence or any bad things that happened there?
Really, if any crime, you really didn't hear much about crime. Because, a lot of it just did not happen. And, the biggest thing, I think, was most of the crime at that point in time was more pointed down to, a lot of it was near UT campus, if it was drug involved. And also you didn't have the internet, so you didn't get, a lot of the things that happened, I don't think really filtered all the way through the area like they do now. But we didn't really think about it. I mean, we always kept the doors locked or whatever, but you didn't think about it. I never thought twice. It's like, it'd be 11 o'clock at night. My husband had traveled with his job at the time, 11 o'clock at night. Darn, I'm out of something. I'd just go to Kroger. I'd just go to the store, 11:30 at night. Didn't think twice about it. You couldn't pay me to do that now.
Yeah.
And part of that is stemming from my, I've been diagnosed with PTSD. I do not drive by myself after dark unless I have no choice in the matter. Coming home to an empty house is not going to happen. Never mind the fact we have 2 collies and 2 Shelties that are all very noisy, and we also have 2 cats and a fish, and they're all rescues. We have a security system. And it ain't going to happen. I even tried one time to cure my phobia. My husband was up in Ohio visiting his parents, and I decided one evening, it was summer, beginning of summer, and about 7:30, 7:45, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to take my time so it'll be not dark when I get home, but dark enough, because I'm going to see if I can't break this phobia. And as I'm driving out of our subdivision, we live in a very small subdivision. One of my neighbors flagged me down. I said, "No, hey, Ralph, how you doing?" He goes, "Jeannie, you can't leave the subdivision." I said, "Why?" He said, there was 2 apparently 2 guys robbed a bank, and they turned into our subdivision, not realizing it didn't have an outlet. And as they turned in, the die pack went off, and they went into the ditch. So they were running around somewhere in the neighborhood. I didn't know my car could go that fast to get from Ralph's house to my house as quickly as I did. And I got in here and shut the doors, turned on the security system, pulled the drain. I was terrified. And on top of it, it turned out the car they were driving, they had stolen from a couple who lived in Village Green that they beat up and tied up and left them in their house, and then stole their car after they had robbed the bank.
So this is some scary stuff that's happening in an area that used to feel really comfortable in.
Yeah, this was about 3.5 years after that had happened, after my parents were murdered. Oh. So, and it's still, at that point in time, that was still unusual. So I had decided, okay, the universe does not want me to be cured of my phobia, and I'm never going to try again.
Wow. And it sounds like it started with your parents, but then other incidents just sort of built on top of that.
Oh, yeah, have definitely contributed to it. I mean, PTSD, you figure your body, especially your brain, a lot of it's chemicals and electrical signals and electrical impulses. And what I've read about PTSD is it actually kind of rewires your brain so that, things, you look at things differently, you feel things differently. And some of the byproduct, for lack of a better word, from PTSD are migraines, vertigo, anxiety, and panic attacks. And guess who ended up with all of those? So, I just do what I can to control them.
I don't think anyone can blame you for having, PTSD after something like this happening. It's, I talk to so many people that are affected, with these ripple effects, when someone's killed, in your case, 2 loved ones of yours were killed. There's a ripple effect. There's other things that happen as a result of that are life-changing for people. So I don't think anyone can, blame you or fault you for having this following something tragic like that.
Oh, you would be surprised with the number of ignorant and insensitive people out there that have told me I need to move on, I need to get over it, and I need to quit being a professional victim. They consider one of David Leon Scarborough, the one who's coming up for parole from his part of murdering my parents, his one cousin refers to me as a professional victim because I am standing up for my parents and because I am protesting his cousin's parole.
That's all.
And we've been harassed off and on by his family for years, and it was just like little bits here and there until the first parole, and his one aunt told me I needed to quit picking on him. But this time they've really ramped up and gotten nasty.
Huh.
And they tell me the Scarborough should sue me for slander. Everything I've said in the petition, everything I've said in emails, on Facebook, on Nextdoor, whatever, on interviews, you can find that in the court records. You can find that in his confession. And and you can find like the TV stations that were in the court recorded it. Not to mention the fact we were there. I remember some of that. There are parts of that trial that are like if the moment I think about it, the clarity. It's almost like it's playing out in front of my face right there again.
Let's talk a little bit about these two individuals. How did they happen to come into contact with your parents? What set this all in motion, and how quickly did they get caught? How did they get caught?
Well, there were three of them. Thomas Gagne Jr. was a few weeks from being 21, David Leon Scarborough a few weeks from being 19, and Harley Watts a few weeks from being 14. Now, Gagne came from like this little mini crime mafia family. His father was the epitome of evil. But what happened is the three of them had basically been going through Village Green ringing doorbells trying to find a house that nobody was home. And now when my parents were gone, they still left, like couple lights on here and there to make it look like somebody might be home. Plus, there was an 84-pound collie in the house barking her head off. So when they rang the door and nobody came, the thing that's as ironic is if my dad had been out of town because he traveled to jobs, my mother, if the doorbell rang, she wouldn't have answered it. Even if she'd been there, she wouldn't answer it because she figures I don't know you. You're not going to be showing up in my house without calling this time of night, kind of thing. But they went around the back and they broke in, went into the screened-in porch and then broke in from the screened-in porch through into the kitchen. And my parents had gone out to dinner. It was supposed to have snowed that night. There'd been a big front coming down that stopped and went someplace else, which is not unusual in East Tennessee because East Tennessee is actually one of the more difficult places in the world to accurately predict weather because we're sandwiched in between the Smoky Mountains and the Cumberland Ridge Mountains, and we also have two different jet streams that go above us. So because it hadn't snowed, it had been cold, and they had cabin fever, and they went out to dinner. You don't know how badly I wish it had snowed that night. Because those three pieces of trash, Harley Watts was a lookout in the car, and Gagne and Scarborough broke into my parents' house. And my parents came home from going out to dinner. They shot my father 5 times, my mom 7. They took the wallet out of my dad's pants while he was laying there dying. Because unfortunately, their deaths were not instantaneous. There is no way an ambulance could have gotten there quick enough from what the medical examiner said. But the thing is, with my mom, they shot her 6 times from across the room. Then they walked up and put the gun less than 7 inches from her forehead and pulled the trigger. And where she was when they started shooting her, where she ended up slumped, for lack of a better word, was next to an end table that had a cordless phone on it. And the thing was, the way the couch was and the lamp and that cordless phone, if they hadn't walked up to my mom to shoot her in the forehead, which they would have had to, she would have already been on the floor at that point, they wouldn't have seen the phone, the cordless phone. So they stole the phone and the base. Never mind, they just shot someone from a set across the room, and they also shot her right in the forehead. They wanted to make sure she couldn't call out for help.
Sounds like a very cold-blooded group of young men, for a better term.
Oh, they are. Well, the Sunday before, a guy was home watching the Super Bowl, and I don't remember who was playing, but I can remember so many people talking about how they didn't even bother to finish watching it because it was such a bad game. And in this case, this guy was feeling kind of loud. He was coming down with a cold or something, and he said the game was so lousy, he decided to go up and go to bed. Well, he's woken up because he can hear something in the house, and he gets out of bed and he starts to walk towards his bedroom door, and he goes, "Who's there?" He got shot 3 times through the door. Thomas Gagne Jr., with the same gun he and Scarborough used to murder my parents that Friday night.
Wow. And how close was this to your parents' house?
Not very far. Not all that far. And to twist the knife even farther, my husband and this guy knew each other in college. They lived in the same dorm. He played football. My husband played basketball. I think he played football. Maybe it was baseball. But he and my husband knew each other.
Wow.
And Tim did somehow survive. The police told me that the doctor said if he had been in such good shape, he would have never made it because he had 3 massive heart attacks while he was in the hospital because of all the damage done to his body.
I guess at that time he couldn't point out who this was that did this to him, or he would have maybe been off the street.
No, because, the door was shut between them. And what's ironic is we decided to attend the trial of Gagne for this in July of 97 because we wanted to show support for the sheriff's office and support for the DA's office. And also we wanted Gagne to know, hey, we're here and we're watching you. And all of a sudden, this guy comes around the corner and goes, "Bry?" And he goes, "Tim?" And they both go, "What are you doing here?" And all of a sudden, Tim gets like a light bulb in his, because all of a sudden he realized, oh my gosh, it was Bry's in-laws that were murdered. And then he says, well, I have to testify today. And that's when and all of a sudden we realized, oh, God, we couldn't believe it. Here's somebody that he knew. My husband knew.
Yeah. So this guy being involved in both cases just proves what a dangerous person he was.
Oh, yeah. Well, he had 2 aggravated assaults as a juvenile. And when he got transferred to a halfway house within a couple of days, he walked off and nobody even bothered to look for him.
That could have been a chance to stop him, and maybe none of this would have happened.
Oh, it gets better. In 1994, I can't remember exactly when, 1994, David Leon Scarborough got arrested while trying to steal a car. He had a gun, and he had illegal drugs on him. Well, his parents hired an attorney. He and his parents convinced his attorney that he's never done anything like this before. He'll never do anything like this again. So he took the case, and they go to the DA. And they spin the same story to the DA. DA dropped the charges.
Wow.
A few months later, guess who was in murdering my parents? And the thing that's ironic about it is Scarborough's parents have an expunged conviction for possession. And he and Gagne got into a shootout at one time over a girl. And Scarborough didn't tell his parents. Gagne went to his parents to apologize to them about it. That whatever story he spun. His parents forgave him and didn't call the police. Somebody was shooting at their son, and they allow him in and out of their house. After that, of course, I personally think that's where his father was getting his drugs from. So, that's just my opinion based on some things that a couple of his relatives who choose to remain anonymous because they're terrified of that family have told me.
Huh. So it sounds like just a really bad crowd of people that are hanging around together.
Oh, yeah, and see, on top of it, Scarborough and his family, they were in church constantly. His mother stood up in church and made the announcement that I knew her son was innocent. I just wanted someone to pay. One of the most asinine comments I could ever think of. And that I forced the sheriff to arrest him. I never heard of him the first time he got arrested. It's not like my parents were socially, financially, politically, religiously, whatever, well-connected, and God knows Brian and I aren't either. So how were we supposed to force the sheriff to do that? And then one time during one of the motion hearings, I was walking down coming back from the cafeteria or something, and David's now ex-wife, who, that's a story unto itself. That's another family that was torn apart by Scarborough. Her mother, was with me because her family hated him, and nobody could have been more supportive than they were for us during that entire ordeal. And she and I were walking back, and all of a sudden we hear Scarborough's mother go, "Well, if they didn't want their house broken into, they shouldn't have gone out to dinner."
Well, that's pretty disturbing, pretty disgusting to hear something like that.
Yeah, and I could feel, because Linda looped her arms through mine and started pulling me over towards the wall. Because at that point, I had just been like a laser focus straight ahead of me and was telling myself, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And, and so we got back into the courtroom, and I looked there, I said, "So, did you pull me over towards the wall because you were afraid I was going to go after them, or you were going to go after them?" "Oh, because she hated him." She goes, "Both." And so we were able to have a little bit of a laugh. But, yeah, it's amazing how crude and crass and insensitive people can be, especially the murderers' families.
Yeah. And maybe that's a sign of where some of their stuff comes from, if they've got that kind of support going. And
Oh, yeah. I mean, and Gagne came from a known crime family. Harley Watts started selling and using, they all started selling and using drugs in middle school, which Scarborough testified that he was like 13 or 14. Gagne, with his family, he could have been dealing in kindergarten. But Harley Watts was 10 years old when he started stealing and using and selling drugs for him. His mother let her son, when he was 13 years old, go hang out and run around with two high school dropouts who were 6, 7 years older than him, no jobs, yet always had cash, had money for cars and cigarettes. And she let her 12, 13-year-old child go hang out with them, leave her house with them. I mean, the saying, you can't fix stupid, not even with duct tape.
Definitely not a good crew, and it sounds like maybe when some of them get together, they just all, rub each other, or they rub off on each other and make whatever is going on even worse. Like they're fueling each other's bad stuff that they're doing.
Well, there's an old Native American saying that says there are two wolves inside of all of us that are constantly fighting. And the one good versus evil. And the one that will win is the one you feed the most. They all definitely feed the evil wolf.
Oh. How did these guys wind up getting caught, and how quickly did they get caught for what they did to your parents?
Well, the first time Scarborough and Gagne were arrested, the sheriff's department apparently had their eyes on the Gagne, shall we say, crime empire in the peripherals. So they were arrested as basically persons of interest at that point. But they didn't have enough, to really hold them. Then that following May, Harley Watts got caught trying to steal a car. I can't remember if he was with Gagne exactly or for Gagne, one or the other. 14 years old, freaks out, starts babbling. So you can try to, not get in too much trouble or any trouble for trying to steal the car and having drugs with him. And starts telling him everything about that night, including that David Scarborough, who was the one that carried the gun back to the car. So once they arrested Gagne and Scarborough, they all start confessing, and they all start pointing fingers at the other.
So it sounds like they turned on each other pretty quickly to save their own hides.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And that's not unusual. Once again, they feed the evil wolf. And what kills me is all of a sudden here a few weeks ago, I did an interview with one of the local TV stations, and I guess one of his family members saw it or he saw it or whatever, so he called the reporter and wanted to do an interview. And he was claiming, I wasn't even there, I'm innocent, it was this guy. And see, unfortunately, not long, I can't remember exactly when, it was afterwards, there was a young man by the name of Joe Ridings who worked when there was a Radio Shack in the Village Green Shopping Center, and these people came in one night, and this guy decided that Joe, whether or not he really was flirting with his girlfriend and murdered him. So he tried to claim it wasn't that guy, because that guy's name was Manning. It was the other guy, Nance, that did it. Well, then all of a sudden, this Nance guy, who was in jail life without parole for his part in the murder of Joe Ridings, he goes to the sheriff's office and he says, I was there with this other guy, it wasn't them. And I listened several times to his so-called confession. Number one, he has never been in my parents' house. He had no clue of the layout or where anything. And two, he had no clues to what was stolen. And also you could tell when he was speaking freely versus when he had obviously memorized something. Because, the cadence and the timbre of the voice changes. So they also went up and talked. The other guy was in Ohio in murder. In Ohio for murder or something. He's going to be in jail the rest of his life. And he told him point blank, he wasn't even in Knox County when that happened. And that he had no reason to lie to him because it wouldn't do any good because he was never going anywhere. And what was really sad, though, he said, he didn't mind prison. It was the nicest place he ever lived.
That's trouble.
So, yeah. That is sad right there. So anyway, right now Scarborough's trying to claim that they are the ones now, that he's innocent. They're the ones that did it. He is trying to rewrite history. He seems to forget there were, people who are still around, who were there during all of this, who heard the testimony, who saw the taped confession. The sheriff's office investigated the fake confession. I testified at the post-conviction hearing about the fake confession. Scarborough's one attorney got really mad at me because he couldn't trip me up, because there was nothing to trip up. And I'm like, what kind of idiots do you think we are? Or do you think the parole board is? That we're just going to believe anything that comes out of your mouth when you already have a history as a liar? Yeah, because he had a deal he made with the sheriff's office that apparently a lesser charge or something. I never knew the details of that. But that as long as they told him the truth, and they found out he didn't. So when he was being questioned by the prosecutor asked him, something about lying to the police. And he said, I just wanted to help them. And the prosecutor stepped back and says, you lied to the police because you wanted to help them. And he nods his head and says, yes. He goes, why didn't you just go ahead and tell them that you were standing there and you watched Gagne shoot one of them and then go and shoot the other one. And his comment was, I didn't want to lie that much.
Jeez. Well, and just to backtrack a little bit, all three of these guys go through the legal process. At the time, what did each one get? They were found guilty. What did they all get sentenced to?
Well, the juvenile, because he agreed to testify against Scarborough and Gagne, they allowed him to be tried in the juvenile court, which I can understand because even at 14, 15 years old, he only looked like he was 10 years old. Anybody with a heart on a jury would have looked at his face and not been able to convict him. And he did testify against against Scarborough. When Scarborough was convicted and was going to get life, 2 counts of life with parole, plus the aggravated burglary and robbery and stuff, and everything was consecutive, Gagne panicked. He was afraid he was going to get the death penalty. So he reached out and asked for a plea bargain to get the same thing that Scarborough got, which that happened. Well, then several years later, we had a bunch of idiots on the Tennessee State Supreme Court who decided to rearrange and change a case law and make it retroactive. And it overturned over 1,000 murder convictions in the state of Tennessee. And Scarborough's were one of them. So that conviction for the murders gets overturned, but fortunately not for the aggravated robberies and burglary.
And just to clarify, what was it about the murders that got overturned? What was the piece that overturned it? What were they arguing affected it?
The judge instructed the jury that they could charge him guilty of first-degree murder or second-degree murder. The Supreme Court decided that facilitation of murder should have been added in there also. So they created this new law that if you get charged with murder, even if it's first-degree murder, you have to give the jury instructions that they can choose first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or facilitation of murder. Now, the judge followed the law exactly as it was written at the time of the murders and the trial. But then the Supreme Court made it retroactive. As most things when changes in the law occur in the criminal justice system, they always make it retroactive for the criminals, but they never make it retroactive for the victims.
Sure. That's got to be frustrating for these guys to sort of go from being all in on convictions for the murders to now they're just basically in jail for the robbery part of it. Well,
his sentence was about to run out because, see, in the state of Tennessee, for every day a felon serves for whatever crime they've committed, they get 2 days off.
Oh, wow.
Their sentence.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's stupid. So anyway, fortunately, it was right at the cusp of that, so there had to be a bail hearing. And fortunately, the prosecutor asked for $1 million in bail, and the judge gave him $750,000 in bail, $750,000, which Scarborough's response was, "That's not fair."
Yeah, it's not fair that your parents were gunned down in their own home as their 45th anniversary was coming up either, but
exactly. And then on top of it, the trial kept getting postponed because there were so many. And then our judge was in ill health, and so finally, Scarborough and his attorneys went to the prosecutor and discussed a plea bargain. Now, we agreed to it because, well, number one, at that time, we didn't know about the 2-for-1. And which when they told me that he was on the cusp of being released anyway, I should have asked questions, but I was still about, well, wait a minute, he's still got X amount of years, but I was so overwhelmed by the fact the murder convictions had been overturned and that we'd have to go back to trial, that just kind of flew by. So we agreed to the plea bargain. And he was supposed to spend, 2 second-degree murder charges, 30 years each. Once again, we did not know at that point in time about the twofers. And so one of the reasons that we agreed to it was emotionally, the thought of having to go back through that again, having to be around him and his family again, just was nauseating. And also, even though I had plenty of vacation time, because the company I worked for at the time, I'd been there pretty much longer than most, I had a lot of vacation time, but I was still afraid that I might get fired.
Yeah.
So we took the plea bargain. Yeah. But if we had known that he got 2 days off for every day served, I would have risked losing my job in a New York heartbeat.
Yeah. And this is
for a trial.
This is an ordeal for you to have to go through again, just to, to deal with all this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. He and his parents never told their friends and relatives the truth. All his friends and relatives, or their friends, and like members of their church, they think that he is wrongly convicted, wrongly accused, because none of them came to the motion hearings. None of them were at the trial. He had one grandmother that stopped by for a couple of hours a couple of times, and that was it. And then the day he was convicted, after the jury had finished deliberating the conviction, they went back for the sentencing. At that point, his younger sister was there for the sentencing, and then she was there for the plea bargain. But she was not there for the rest of it, and I know there's no way they even told her the truth, because she's told me, I do not know the facts, and I must not have a heart, because I am fighting his parole.
Yeah, such an ugly situation for it to be. These your parents die in their own home violently at the hands of these guys, and here you are, less than 25 years later or so, and
it'll be 27 years in February. And that's in the petition. They keep saying he's been in jail since he was 18 years old, or prison. That's not true. He was almost 19. He was 3 weeks away from being 19 when the crimes were committed. That was 1995. We didn't get to trial till January of 1998. He was convicted and sentenced January 16, 1998. He was almost 22, and that's when they took him to prison.
Okay. And yeah, so and this entire time, it's still for what they did to your parents, it's a relatively low amount of time, and now you're faced with the possibility that this guy could walk out of prison.
And I'm terrified that if he is paroled and if he is released, based on who he is, what his family is like, he's going to do this. He's going to rip another family apart like he did mine. The only thing, he has shown no remorse at the plea bargain. All he said was, "I'm sorry for my part. I'm sorry for my involvement." At the last plea bargain, all he said was, "I'm sorry for my involvement." No emotion. That's like, "I'm sorry I stepped on your toe."
Yeah, just like he's doing the words because he has to, not because he means them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's terrible. And you're not taking this lying down. You're fighting it. You're
I am my parents' daughter. I have a stubborn streak a mile long.
Well, and then that's a good segue to what I want to talk about, because you've got a petition. You're trying to, get people to sign this to keep this guy, put some pressure on to keep him locked up. And I think time is of the essence here. You're trying to get 2,500 signatures by the next parole hearing, which is December 9th, 2021. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
And I have to have the petitions into them several days before.
Okay. So this episode.
So we're up to almost 2,200.
Okay.
Hey, I'd like to have 1 million signatures, honestly, but
Well,
2,500 is definitely a good goal.
Yeah, and this episode's coming out December 4th, so it's 5 days before the hearing, but there's no time to waste, so listeners can please go over and sign this petition, maybe share it on social media, get some other people to sign it.
Definitely.
Can you tell listeners how to find the petition and
Sure can.
how they can help you?
Yes, you can go to change.org. And probably the easiest way to do it is just use the little magnifying glass search tool and type in Justice for Carol, Carol, and Les, LES, dots, DOTTS. And I do want to say, please read the petition. I don't want anybody to sign something they haven't read. And then please sign it and share it. There's also, when you sign it, they also give a little area of reasons for signing. If you would like to leave a comment as to what your personal feelings are about why you're signing it or that type of thing, please feel free to. We need all the help we can get. I do not want to see another family have to go through what mine has because of people like David Leon Scarborough. And I'm terrified if he gets out, he's going to be diving right back into the cesspool he came out of. Don't forget, he has been selling, using, stealing since he was 13, 14 years old. Oh, and he's been doing the same thing in prison. He has been written up for multiple infractions, multiple disciplinary actions, drug paraphernalia, flunked drug tests, using drugs, selling drugs, stealing. Yeah. He has not changed.
It seems like this is all he knows, is this kind of list of...
He thinks he's entitled to it. And several of his family members keep saying he deserves a second chance. He's had a bunch of second chances he's blown, and that he's been in prison long enough. My question is, have my parents been dead long enough? Have I grieved long enough? Have I missed my parents long enough? What exactly is their definition of long enough for that?
Just it's a terrible situation for this guy to, cold-bloodedly kill your parents and realistically have a chance of walking free after such a short time. It's just scary. So please, if there's anyone out there listening that will take the time to sign the petition, head over, sign it, share it on social media. You also have a Facebook page set up for your parents, right? Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I do. It's Les, LES dash Carol, CAROL dots, DOTTS. And there's updates on there, there's pictures on there, and you can actually, message me through there. And on the Facebook page itself, on some of the things that I have posted, like a couple of there's the one that's on there right now is from from a Zoom video interview. Please watch that, and you can make a comment, and then go to change.org and sign the petition. And please encourage others to do it. There's an old saying, there for the grace of God, go I. Yeah. And this just proves this can happen to anyone, anytime.
Yeah, any one of us could find ourselves in your shoes somehow, and not want to see the person that took our loved one from us having a chance to walk out of prison prematurely. So hope everyone will do it. I'll put it in the show notes so people can find the petition as well easily and click right on it. And just one other thing I wanted to check too as we wrap up. What about the other two guys? What's their status as far as prison?
Well, Harley Watts has been out free and clear since December 2001 because he was a juvenile. And guess what he's been doing? He's been getting arrested for aggravated felony and some other things, but he's not seen any real jail time. And, of course, Gagne, he's still in prison, and so far it doesn't look like he's coming up for parole anytime soon, but unfortunately he will.
And then you'll have to go through the same thing again.
Yep.
Wow. Well, I can't thank you for coming on enough to share your parents' story with us and helping us to get to know them a little bit. And I hope somehow, some way that you are able to keep this guy in jail where he belongs and hopefully you get the outcome that I think is just that you deserve.
Thank you. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to reach out to people. And thank you so much.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. I'd like to thank Sonny Landon for writing and research assistance in this episode. As we wrap up, I'd like to play a preview for a true crime podcast. It's called Colts, Crime, and Cabernet. Be sure to give it a listen. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder of My Family, and I hope you'll join me for it. But before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.
When we started Cults, Crimes, and Cabernet, it was just a conversation between two friends about true crime over a glass of wine. It quickly grew into a passion project, and Melissa and I transformed this hobby into a mission.
Our mission is to be a trusted resource while empowering others to use their voice and create a positive change for victims nationwide. After a year of covering different genres of cases, Whitney and I chose to narrow our focus and take a journey covering cold and unsolved cases in Season 3.
While our main focus will be unresolved cases, we will still be exploring the fascinating world of cults. So we invite you to pop a cork and grab a glass because we have work to do.
Cults, Crimes, and Cabernet is streaming on all major podcast platforms.